Welcome back, everybody. My name is Grace, or Gibby, whatever you prefer, and today I am coming at you with a sort of fragile analysis video because of the gift boxing set. Now, the armor hasn't come out yet at the time of the recording. What I'm specifically looking at is practically using Fragile as a damage source. Now, Fragile depends on a lot of things, and I've got a lot of clips lined up to show you how it can weigh out against other options. But Fragile, basically, there's a couple basic rules. This set's Fragile is based on ice resistance, so the higher the monster's ice resistance, the stronger the effect will be. Now, Fragile in general, it also has some general properties. If the monster has higher HP, the Fragile will do a lot more damage and reduce their HP by a lot more. And if the monster has low endurance, the Fragile will also reduce their HP by a lot more compared to a monster with high endurance. So that's pretty much it as a baseline. I'm not trying to convince people that this set is trash or it needs a buff, but I do think that people are sort of overhyping or overappreciating the utility that Fragile has as a generic damage source. I'm not saying I think it's terrible, but I think that if you look at the clips and see how much damage it does compared to other options, or the problems that it has more limited uses than people are sort of hyping it up to have. Not that it has no uses, but I think the uses are narrower than the current perception. So I want to make this video to sort of shed light on the strengths of Fragile and the weaknesses of Fragile. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy some of these clips, and I'll see you in the next one. So before the clips roll, I just want to make two quick corrections, or maybe three. One, I said the Iron Golem had 250 endurance. That was just a mistake. I forgot that it had the subtraction when I looked at the stat line. Two, I said that the Fragile does more damage or less damage depending on how low the HP is. When I was fighting the Hard Bake Oven boss, you'll see that in a bit. That wasn't true. It was just that the status was increasing in strength less than initially because the status is already strong, so casting another version didn't strengthen it that much, so the boss lost less HP compared to the first cast. I think that's it. Now enjoy the clips, and keep in mind those two mistakes I made. So, here is the test that I'm going to do for the new Fragile spell compared to a normal damage spell. And we're facing Big Red, who I have the battle log showed up because I need to look at the numbers to see how much damage the Fragile effect itself does. But we're fighting Big Red, who has 200 dice, which means the Fragile effect is going to be doubled relative to a normal monster. And it has 200 Delight, and that's what we're going to use as a comparison later on. First, I'm going to cast the Fragile spell, then I'm going to use Lore Master's Tome to cast an average light spell, and I'm going to compare the overall damage of both. For spell boosters, I'm using Arcane Amp and Intellect Misc and the Polala Bet. I'm keeping it pretty limited. Well, I guess I'm using a lot, but I want to make sure that my spell inflicts and my attacks hit, so it's an even test. So without further ado, I'm going to open the battle log and use the ice spell. So 4 hits. Now let's see. Okay. So 700 damage, 492 damage, 378 damage, 594 damage. That sounds like about 1100, 1400, 2100. So it had 8k HP, the attack did 2100 damage, and the Fragile, therefore, did about 3k damage. So on a monster with 0 end, with 200% ice, Fragile does a lot of damage. Now, you might be thinking, like I mentioned earlier, this Fragile is temporary. So if you don't kill the monster in 4 turns, it'll go away, the damage will. But, with a monster like this, a Mook monster, as they call them, I'm pretty sure you're going to kill it in 4 turns. Now, let's use Lore Master's Tome and see how much damage we would have done. We'll probably kill the monster. But if we don't, it'll be even better showcase. The good. So I don't know if you saw that, but that was 670, 1175, and 978, which is about 2100 damage, which is honestly surprising. That makes me think that I might have Lucky Striked on the ice spell. But so, a normal ice spell, I mean, you have damage ranges, but did about the same amount of damage, but without the fragile amount. Now, this is pretty subnormal because the ice spell is supposedly paying half its damage for the effect. So, I'm going to cast the good one more time, and we're just going to watch it hit. Ah, okay. Didn't show up on the battle log. Okay. Well, you saw that there. The ice spell was much more effective than the light spell on a monster with high ice resist and 0 end. Okay, so in this next clip, I want to make a couple corrections. If you guys are good at math, you'll realize that I messed up the math on the last clip. So the ice spell actually did 2200 base damage and 2600 fragile damage, while the light spell did 2800 base damage. So the ice spell still did much better, but not to the degree that I initially thought. For this next test, I've got a bunch of stuff going on because I had to regenerate my resources, but the boosting is the same. I promise you that. So the spells will have the same boost of damage, except that this time I'm going to use a spellcaster lean armor instead of a blood mage because that is a multiplicative boost and not an additive boost, and it's more, I think, realistic for general questing for most people. At least for me, I only use spellcaster lean because I think it's better than blood mages. So this is another monster with ice and light resistance at 200 and 0 endurance. So the fragile spell should be at maximum potency here. If you're wondering where I got these, this is at the Wicked King quest. That quest has a bunch of demons, which all have high ice and light resist, or even ice and light resist at least. So that's where I'm doing this. But I have celerity. I think I have celerity. Yes, I do. So I'm going to use the same boosting. And first, I'm going to use the Santarctic Crusher. Okay, so now I learned from last time. I'm going to pause, crunch the numbers, and get right back to you. Okay, so I just went through the battle log. I'll flash it for you guys. But the spell did about 2100 damage, or 2200 damage, and the fragile did 2100 damage. Now we're going to switch to Lore Master's Tome, and there's a small difference because I'm not using Silas Staff, but that's minimal. I'm not too worried about it. And the numbers won't pop up on the battle log if the monster dies, or the last numbers won't pop up accurately if the monster dies. So let's just try and be quick and look. That was a dump truck of damage, but unfortunately one of them was a lucky strike. I think it was maybe 1200, 1300, and 1100, something around there. We're just going to say that would have been 2800 roughly. All right, let's see. Hold on, I'm going to pause and think about how much a lucky strike is worth. Okay, so it did about 3500 damage in the clip. That was with a lucky strike. I think I'm going to say it would have done about 3000 damage without the lucky strike. Not perfect science, but close enough. So again, the ice spell did outperform the light spell in optimal conditions. So in this next test, we are fighting a Heckhound, which I consider a pretty average monster in terms of resist and HP. Has roughly 4.5k HP and 130 resists to its most damaging elements. That's pretty normal for most monsters, so I think this will make a great test. Once again, I'm using the same amount of boosting. And you might say your boosting is a little unrealistic. Totally fine, as long as it's standard between both spell casts. It is a good comparison. And again, I'm going to be using Spellcaster Lean in the battle log and a calculator in between spells to make sure I get accurate damage numbers. So here we go with the ice spell. Alright, surely I can do that one in my head. 1100 damage. Alright, we'll be back in one moment. Okay, so I couldn't do the math in my head, but the ice spell did 1060 damage, roughly, and the fragile effect did about 1000 damage, roughly. So as you can see, much lower, about by a factor of 2 on the fragile, compared to the monsters with 200% res. Now we're going to cast the light spell and see what happens. Okay, one moment while I add those up. So, this spell did 1,962 damage to the monster, and again, the Hellhound has 0 endurance and 130 of both ice and light. So, as you can see, the fragile spell barely outperformed the normal damage light spell. If you had a burst spell or a spell with Ellie comp, the fragile spell would not have outperformed the normal light spell. So what this tells me is that if something's ice resistance is high and you can get a high impact fragile, because the status is based off of ice resistance, of course, um, then fragile is quite strong. However, if you cannot, then the status is much weaker and maybe weaker than a normal spell. Alright, so I've been setting up some further testing using the Mercuria Guest, which has a toggle to inflict thermal shock. The thermal shock is somewhat inconsistent because all 5 hits have to land and then you have to win the save roll. But I managed to get it early on in a fight against a Yeti, which is a monster that has high endurance. So I'm curious to see what a high endurance monster with effective 200% ice resist, uh, what will happen to them when I use the Santarctic Crusher spell to reduce their endurance. Now I should be able to inflict because I have Fragile Potence, but I will put out Spotter Drake just in case. Okay, so let's check the battle log and crunch some numbers. So in this case, the spell did 1,250 damage, and the fragile effect did 1,062 damage. So this is against a monster with endurance. I got it at the beginning of the fight, so all its HP was left. Well, relatively, almost all of its HP was left. And remember, it had 200% effective ice resist because of the thermal shock. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare that to a destruction, or not a destruction burst. Well, I'll just compare it to destruction burst, and keep in mind that destruction burst is hitting on 150% resistance, and this spell hit on 200% resistance. So let me just change up my pets so I don't get one banged. Let's see, Space Gauntlet, Ellie Shield, and I still have the intellect boost, don't worry. Amulet of Draconin. Okay, here we go. Oh, goddamn. Okay, hold on a moment. We'll wait till the battle log calms down. Oh, thank goodness I dodged. I would have taken... Oh, I didn't want to take that much damage, but it's okay. Okay, so I'll pause here and do the math. So, Destruction Burst did 2,400 damage compared to about the damage from the Ice Spell, which is I think 2,200. If I said the wrong number, my bad. But so Destruction Burst did more damage, didn't take Mercuria Guest to set up, and was hitting on a lower resist because of the thermal shock effect. So I'm not saying that the fragile spell is useless, but against monsters with endurance, it's quite weak. So I'm going to do a similar test, but on a monster that should emphasize the difference between the fragile spell and the destruction burst spell, because the fire resist is only 120, while because of the thermal shock, the ice resist is effectively 200%. Okay. So the spell did 1,670 base damage, and the fragile effect did 1,500 damage. Now I'm expecting Destruction Burst to do less damage, but we'll see. Also, I'm going to switch to an Earth Shield, just in case I get clobbered, and I'm going to use Space Gauntlet, again, just in case I get clobbered. Okay. So in this instance, the Destruction Burst spell did 2,300 damage. So against a monster with 10k HP, if it has significantly higher ice resistance than fire resistance, or if you're using thermal shock, you will get a stronger impact out of your fragile than out of a pure damage spell. Up next, I've got a little more of a for fun clip to see what'll happen. Basically doing science and AQ. Now, Gogs, if you didn't know, have a negative endurance. And this spell seems to be more potent based on two things. Or fragile itself, not the spell, is more potent based on two things. One, if the monster has a lot of HP, and two, if the monster has a low endurance. Now, Gogs don't have a lot of HP, but they do have negative endurance. So I want to see what will happen if I use Santarctic Crusher, and I'm going to use Spotted Drake just to make sure it inflicts. And we're going to see what happens. That was an unexpected result. So the Gog went from negative 96 endurance to roughly negative 162. But Gog 2, so one of the Gogs died. But the second Gog, which should have been at full HP, 1734, 1730, well, I'm not sure. Only lost 78 HP. So we're going to redo the test, but I'm going to try and make sure I don't kill it. So I'm going to use a non-spellcaster lean armor, a no intellect misc, and oh, I don't have enough mana. Luckily, we have one more round of thermal shock. I'll just drink a mana potion. All right, and now please hold while we another round of thermal shock. Very nice. Goodness gracious, we're stacking it up. Okay. Okay, so now there's only one monster, and let's see. Did it lose more HP? No, it didn't. Okay, I thought that maybe the HP loss would be delayed. That doesn't seem to be the case. Oh, okay. So did you see that? It got bursted at the end there. It was at about 500 HP, and it went straight to 0. So, conclusions on negative endurance monsters. First of all, you have to bring a resist swap. Second of all, the HP is so low that it's hard to see what's going on. I think what I might do is I might go to the most recent war quest where they had all those reference monsters to the Wizard of Oz, because there is a Iron Golem there that has negative 250 endurance status. So I'm going to see what this spell does to that guy. Okay, so here we are at the endurance reduced Iron Golem. I think this should have a good effect, but I'm not positive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay in a non-spellcaster lean armor. He does have 250 endurance, so I'm going to need to cast Arcane Amplification for enough potency to make sure I inflict. And I'm going to use Spotter Drake as well. And here we are. Let's see what happens. Explosion tears through their foe and their endurance. Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't see much HP loss. Oh, this is interesting. So Hickory lost 1 HP from the fragile effect. Oh, I see what happened. So if you look at Hickory's page, the Heartless effect seems to be a fragile on its own, and it seems to be a permanent fragile status. So our fragile status just added onto it and made it a tiny bit more powerful. You can see how it's 250.033 whatever. So this is not good for testing, which is unfortunate. I was hoping to get a cool clip, but interesting. Some AQ science that I think no one has discovered before. Alright, so in this next clip, I'm going to be utilizing one of Fragile's most interesting effects, and that is its ability to circumvent damage caps on bosses, modern bosses. Now you'll see this guy's damage cap is 538. It has a high clawback, but that's not really what we're interested in. So I just used one cast of the Fragile spell. He has 150 ice resistance, so it was a 50 endurance reduction. And he lost 1500 HP, so way over his damage cap. I'm going to keep casting it and see how practical it is to take down bosses with it. Also, keep in mind that Fragile is not affected by boss boost. So, you can use it against pretty much any boss, and you shouldn't have issues. How much damage did he take that time? Another 1500. Oh, interesting. So it seems like the endurance reduction is standard, even if they're at high HP or low HP. Okay, let's see. Now he's thermal shocked, so he should take even more damage from... Oh, no. The fragile didn't inflict. Okay, so let's use Essence Orb. I won't have enough mana. Gonna use that. Maybe that'll give me enough mana. This is a Dreamweaver Shield. It has a bunch of random effects, but it can regen mana. So if I have Celerity, it should give me enough mana to spellcast twice. We'll see. Getting dangerously low here, but call it content. Refresh our boosts. Amulet of Draconin, Slay Ward, and tear through their foe and their endurance. Alright, let's see how much damage that did. So now that he's low HP, it only did 310 damage. Now I have to make sure I survive this next hit. To be honest, I'm 300... oh wow, you don't have a fire shield on. That could have caused a problem. I'm 3% fire resist. Also, I'll just use an Ellie shield because I think there's a bug. Ah, no, there's not. Okay. Amulet of Draconin for the fire resistance, and I'll simply just drink a health potion. Thermal shock once again. Let's see how much mana my fairy godmother gets me. Okay, so thermal shock 1 round. Should be able to cast... let me get some celerity. And we're going to use Shadow Feeder Pendant. Okay, that was lucky. And Spotter Drake for maximum infliction chance. And the Slay Ward Shield, which gives potency. So that time it did 1300 HP loss. I'm not quite sure what happened with the other attempt. If you look here, well, I can't remember what happened, but I'm not sure what else happened with the weaker effect I had earlier. But as you can see, I've used 4 spell casts. I haven't been boosting it very optimally or playing very smart, but I've done like 6,000 damage with just the fragile effect. Now it only lasts 5 turns, so I'm going to show you. If I sit here for 5 turns and do nothing, he will heal most of it back up. So I'm just going to showcase that. I will mute the microphone while I just play these rounds out, and you can see what happens. So here we are. There should be a big jump in health after this turn, after the monster attacks. Look at that. So because the fragile ran out, he healed all of the endurance back, and therefore his HP went way up. So if you're fighting a boss and you're having trouble managing resources, and you use a fragile, and you have to spend several turns healing, the boss might heal from the fragile before you can inflict another fragile. Now, you know how I waited and did nothing? If I had cast the fragile spell again, it would have refreshed the duration, so he would have still been weakened. So I'm not saying it's a terrible option, I'm just saying there are caveats to using fragile, and you have to be careful to make sure you re-inflict before the status runs out. However, that being said, against fire bosses with damage caps, this can be a very effective way to circumvent those damage caps with an ice fragile spell. And again, they made spell versions, well, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but they made spell versions for all of the main stats, including charisma. So you have lots of options on your choice of infliction. Overall, I think it's a great option to get around boss damage caps. In this clip, I'm going to be taking on the Limkrag boss, which, if you don't know, is a really old boss from the Dragonspine Firespawn Part 2 quest. The reason I want to take him on is because he has ice resistance that's pretty high. His endurance is pretty low, and he's low level, so the fragile will almost always inflict. So I'm just going to start it off. Your pets and guests are removed, so I won't be able to boost it as much. But I'm just going to start with that. Also, I think you get a huge additive damage bonus to your damage. But let's see how much damage that first hit did. So the hits did a couple thousand damage, and the fragile itself did 3,800. So let's cast it one more time. That looked like it did a lot. The hits did a ton, and the fragile itself did 3,000 damage. So against a boss like this, and again, this is more of a showcase than a practical application. But you can see I'm hitting huge numbers with the fragile because the boss not only has high HP, but also relatively high ice resistance. And I'm able to inflict the status reliably because of the low level. But if you use status potency of any kind, you could get a similar result. So, fragile is strong. It has its uses. And this is, again, these numbers are severely additive boosted because of the way the boss fight works. It just boosts your damage by a ton because its HP is so high, and this was meant to be done in like 2010 before we had all this OP gear. So just remember that it's keeping up in damage with the fragile effect, even though these damage numbers are super boosted. So it's strong, has applications against high HP and high ice resistance monsters. So here is one more thing I want to showcase about the spell. So look at this, 68 endurance for 3 turns. I'm going to cast the spell. It should kill the boss. The boss will go to 0 HP, and then I'll show you what happens. 62 endurance for 5 turns. Because the fragile increased in duration, it decreased in power. So even though I killed the boss actually healed at the end because it gained back some endurance when the status was diluted over a longer duration. So it didn't actually die. Now, what are the applications of this? I can't think of a situation where this would happen in a real battle and you wouldn't be able to just use another effect to kill it. But it's something to keep an eye out for, that if your status is a long duration, or was a long duration, and it goes down to 1 turn, and you cast another long duration effect, the status will get much weaker, and it will result in healing the boss. So you might want to try to execute the boss before the fragile runs out, or figure out another method to maintain the damage. So that's pretty much all I have for fragile at the moment. I tested it out in a ton of scenarios. I tested it out with a ton of damage options, tested it out with high HP, with low HP, with high endurance, with low endurance, even with negative endurance. But I think that overall this shows that fragile is not it's not super broken. It's not crazy strong like people are theorizing it is. It does have uses. It's great for getting around damage caps. It's great for it's great for a couple of situations with high ice resistance or very high HP but low endurance. But I do want to say that I think this status is not crazy. So I want to spread some information and numbers throughout this video. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with. Let me know what you think, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace and love, everybody. Have a great day.